When we talk about America, the familiar image is that of a nation bound together by constitutional principles, where federal power and state rights are balanced on a fragile yet enduring scale. And yet, there are moments when that scale shakes violently. This week, one such moment arrived. The Texas National Guard, about 200 soldiers, has been deployed to Illinois with the official mission of protecting the Union amid ongoing protests. The Pentagon has confirmed that the operation will last for 60 days. However, the mayor of Chicago called it an illegal and unconstitutional act. And Illinois, along with the city of Chicago, has filed a lawsuit in federal court to block the decision. The story here is not merely about 200 soldiers. It is a test of America's system of divided powers. Who holds the authority when the military steps into a city? What can the federal government do? And how far can local authorities resist? Note, this video is for analysis and reference purposes only. It does not represent any political or media organization.
To understand this controversy, we need to go back a little to two foundational legal texts. First, the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. In simple terms, it says this: the U.S. military cannot be used to enforce domestic law unless there is explicit authorization from Congress or the Constitution. In other words, soldiers are not police officers. This was designed to protect democracy from military interference in everyday political life. Second, the Insurrection Act, enacted in the early 19th century and still in effect today. It allows the president to deploy the military in cases of riots, insurrections, or when local authorities are no longer capable of enforcing the law. This is an important exception and a perpetual source of controversy because the question remains, what kind of riot is enough to trigger the act? The tension here lies in this. On paper, the Texas National Guard reports to the governor of Texas. But when they are invited or ordered to Illinois to protect federal property, a series of questions immediately arise. Who gave the order? What exactly is the mission? And does this deployment exceed constitutional limits? In today's deeply polarized political climate, any move toward federalizing security inevitably becomes a flashpoint.
The federal government has announced the deployment of a National Guard unit from Texas to Illinois. The Pentagon confirmed a force of about 200 soldiers, stating that the mission will last for 60 days. Immediately, the governor of Illinois and the mayor of Chicago voiced fierce opposition. They called it a violation of state sovereignty and unconstitutional. Both the state and city governments jointly filed lawsuits requesting an emergency court injunction to halt the deployment. Texas soldiers were seen at the Elwood Army Reserve Center on the outskirts of Chicago. From there, they received orders to protect federal facilities, including agencies related to immigration, which have been at the center of heated political debate. A federal judge has taken up the case. Notably, however, no emergency injunction has yet been issued. That means, at least for now, the troops remain stationed in Illinois. Some supporters argue that the federal government has a duty to protect its personnel and property, but critics warn that the presence of soldiers on city streets could create a sense of militarization of civil life, eroding the freedom of expression. The immediate cause seems clear. The federal government claims it must protect its employees and assets amid ongoing protests. But the deeper cause is far more complex. This is also part of a broader power game between the federal government and politically opposed states. When trust between the two levels of government is low, every action, even one framed as security, is easily seen through a political lens. So what are the consequences? Legal. The courts will have to decide. If they side with the local authorities, it will mark a clear limit on federal power. If they side with the federal government, it could set a precedent for similar protection missions in the future. political. Regardless of who wins, this incident will undoubtedly fuel election debates. It revives the age-old question, how strong do we want the federal government to be, and how independent should the states remain? Social. The image of soldiers appearing in a city amid peaceful protests can make communities uneasy, even fearful. It risks eroding public trust in democratic institutions.
This is not the first time the United States has wrestled with the question, when can the military be deployed on domestic soil? Little Rock, 1957. When the governor of Arkansas resisted the integration of black students into Central High School, President Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and sent in the 101st Airborne Division to protect the students. That was a textbook case. When a state refused to uphold constitutional rights, the federal government was compelled to intervene. Mississippi, 1962. When student James Meredith sought to enroll at the University of Mississippi, riots broke out. President Kennedy, invoking the Insurrection Act, dispatched thousands of troops to ensure federal law was enforced. Detroit, 1967. Urban riots spread rapidly and local forces lost control. The governor of Michigan requested assistance and President Johnson sent in federal troops. This was the classic scenario. The federal government stepped in after the state admitted it could no longer maintain order. And Portland, 2020. More recently, the federal government deployed federal security forces to protect buildings during protests. Local authorities objected, calling it overreach. Images of soldiers without name tags and unmarked vehicles sparked intense debate over transparency and legality. When we compare these cases, a pattern emerges. Successful interventions usually share one of two conditions, either a clear constitutional violation or an explicit request for help from local authorities. The situation in Illinois today is different. There is no large-scale unrest beyond control, and the local government is strongly opposed to federal involvement.
The deployment of the Texas National Guard to Illinois is not merely a legal test. It is a symbolic story, one that reflects how America defines the boundary between the federal government and the states in the 21st century. First, transparency in mission and limits of authority is the key to maintaining public trust. Second, the court system will continue to serve as the final arbiter, and new legal precedents will be shaped from this case. The questions we face today are these. If this deployment is deemed lawful, will it mean that in the future, the federal government can more easily send troops into any city where protests occur? And if the court strikes it down, are we entering a new era where states' rights grow stronger, potentially limiting the federal government's protective role? The answer remains uncertain, but clearly the delicate scale between federal and state power is still trembling. And every event like this is another collision, one that helps shape the path American democracy will take. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support me in future analysis videos.